Casey, human. Hey, you can believe me or not, I don't care. I saw it all with my own eyes. Me and Glenn Parker were walking the Charlotte out of the cowshed. The cow is calm and quiet. It's all as easy as pie. But as soon as we're in the driveway, there's an animal convention happening around my truck. Jumpin' June bugs, there's a big angry dog and a fat pig at the far end. They're squared off, and the dog is growling and barking. It looks as if they're both about to have at it. Meanwhile, there's another dog and a rooster in my cab, don't you know? The dog is barking angry like the first one, and the rooster is crowing like dawn just broke. Then I see a big old horse at the back end, standing where we're supposed to load the cow. He's staring at us, friendly at first. I could have sworn he was smiling. But out of the blue, he starts pushing up against the truck with all his strength, and the truck starts rolling forward. So I leave the cow and rush over to stop the crazy horse and get rid of all these other animals. But suddenly, we're getting swarmed by sheep. I am not making this up. 3 dozen at least. And I'm not talking about a bunch of them standing in our path. No, I'm talking about a whirlwind of sheep circling around us at the speed of sound, like some crazy fair ride, just a blur of bleats and spinning wool. We were pinned in place. I'd never seen anything like it. Well, until my nephew showed me a YouTube clip a week later of something similar from somewhere up in England. But at the time, it had us spooked. And then, as if nothing happened, the sheep stopped. Just like that, they stopped and all started yakking at once. Bridget, it would be inaccurate to say that it happened all at once. Even before Operation Urgent Fury began, certain members of the herd had concerns about the plan. Lionel, Bridget is quite correct. It wasn't about the use of the white tornado, which, for the record, all the sheep wholeheartedly endorsed. No, the disagreement was about whether we should spin in a clockwise direction or counterclockwise. Some might argue that such a detail is pointless, and to that I can only repeat what I said at the time. We stand on principle, and we spin on principle too. Bridget. Yes, well put, Lionel, well put. To spin clockwise or to spin counterclockwise, which direction would have been the strongest statement? It was an issue that we obviously hadn't debated long enough, so we stopped mid-operation to work it out. Audrey, the cow. There was so much to take in all at once. Obviously, the plan wasn't going nearly as well as it should. I couldn't understand what Buster was doing there, not only out of his pen, but standing snout to snout with Max. I could hear Carlton screaming out some speech as if he were rousing the animals to grab pitchforks and attack. But what was most distressing was that the sheep had suddenly stopped their distraction. We all knew that without that extra few seconds, my escape plan was doomed to fail, and my ride to Abbott's War was all but a sure thing. And then... Buster. Oh dear, then? Eddie. Woof. Gosh, and then? Woof. Casey. And then, I know you won't believe me, Glenn Parker says I'm exaggerating, but that's because he's in denial. I saw what I saw, don't you know, and he sure did see it too. So then, this cow comes dancing out of the cowshed. You heard me. I mean, she was dancing, dancing, sashaying her hips side to side, spinning in little circles, doing little tippy-toe steps, and mooing like she was at the Tuesday karaoke night at Connie's Good Times Grill. Jumpin' June bugs, me and Glenn just stopped in our tracks. My jaw was hanging so low, you could have used my mouth as a bread box. And I'm thinking, what in the world is going on at Bittersweet Farm? Buster. You probably know which cow it was, I'll tell you, but, well, she scares me. Yes, she does. Norma, another cow. As I said earlier, I'd rather not discuss it. Simply stated, I could see from where I stood inside the cowshed that the sheep were in disarray, and Farmer was making a beeline to the truck. A distraction was required, so I did the first thing that came to mind. That's all there is to it. Let's move on, shall we? Let's move on, shall we? Audrey, another cow. Norma was my guardian angel that day. Mother would have been smiling and laughing, not only at the beautiful spectacle of a cow performing modern dance, but also for the fact that of all the cows, it was Norma who came to my rescue. Norma looked radiant, and she was so brave, knowing that the rest of the ladies would never see her in quite the same light again. I was just caught up in the distraction as farmer and the driver, so by the time I finally led toward the truck, Buster was already slinking back to his pen with bits of wood that had held the screw. Roy gave a whinny and shook his mane while backing away from the scene. Eddie was on the ground now with Charlton. He looked my way. When our eyes met, he gave me a nod. Mission completed. Eddie, the dog. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Farmer was frustrated. He yelled at Dad to get the sheep back to their pen. I joined in to help because I owed Dad that much, although I knew it would still be a while before he let me off the hook. But I kept Audrey in sight out of the corner of my eye. I saw the driver slide out a long metal slat from the truck's back and dropped the end on the ground with a thud. Then Audrey was led up the ramp in the same way I had once imagined she might climb to the top of the fences and jump to freedom. The driver swung the metal gate shut. Then he slid the latch bolt to lock it in place. When Farmer pushed the ramp back into its sheath, the driver got a clipboard with some paperwork for him to sign. All that time, Audrey stood there, so still at the back of the truck, with the noon sun lighting her that she glowed a dazzling white. She looked like a statue, a beautiful statue. It was quiet on the farm, just as it always is during these Abbott's War departures. The sheep didn't make a fuss. They all went along without complaint. Then the driver got in the cab and started the motor. Suddenly, Audrey shifted, turning herself around so that she faced the back, faced us. All the cows began lowing a sad goodbye. Buster joined in with snorts and sobs, and Roy whinnied and raised himself high on his back legs over and over. Even Charlton started crowing, and as the truck began to pull away from Bitter Street Farm, away from me, I found it impossible to let Audrey go, as if there was a cord connected from her heart to mine. Audrey. Ooh. Eddie chased after the truck for a while, keeping pace through the gates and down the road. We held our gaze the whole time, squeezing every last drop from the fruit of our sweet friendship. Then, second by second, Eddie began to glow slow, and he grew smaller and smaller until he was nothing but a dot on the horizon, and I was completely alone. I watched the gray ribbon of highway spill out from under the truck, as if a big spool of it was unraveling behind us. The road was hilly, climbing high, rolling down into dells, and then cresting yet again over and over. I was reminded of middle boy Lester playing with his toy boat at Artificial Lake, tossing it up and down, talking about storms and crashing waves and calls for rescue. I felt like I was in a storm too, thrown about in a gale, trying to keep balance, trying to keep afloat, and not give up hope. As I grew accustomed to the shifts and concentrated on putting weight to one side and then the other, the shock started to wear off, and I began to take in the surroundings. For the first time in my life, I was off of Bittersweet Farm, the only place I had ever known. I had heard that there were other farms, and I could see Skyview Farms from Viewing Hill, but I had no idea just how many there were. Three Oak Farm, Delancey Farm, Copper Hill Farm. I passed farms with fancy signs and big metal gates, and simple farms with small hand-painted signs next to the gravel road entrance. There were silos and pointy spires spouting up in the distance in every direction. I saw a giant metal snake running alongside us for a while, its head roaring louder than Farmer's tractor, and there were clanging bells and flashing lights announcing its arrival at every crossing. I heard the roar of children rushing about in a play yard, and then more loud clanging bells telling them to stop. I smelled alfalfa and fresh-cut grass and blueberry. It was intoxicating. My fear had transformed into excitement. I confess that for a moment I wished that the truck would never stop. But that foolish thought jarred me into remembering that of course I wanted the trip to end. The whole point was for the trip to end, preferably how and where it was supposed to, with a flat tire next to the large forest. I turned my focus inward again, trying to sense anything different, trying to notice if the truck was leaning or acting up. At first, I could find no change whatsoever, but as we continued on, the bumps in the road began to be felt harder from the front end of the truck. It continued to get worse and worse, and it occurred to me that I hadn't seen a farm in quite a while. All I saw was forest on both sides.